The most dangerous lie is the one told in a place where the truth has to wait its turn. The courtroom felt colder than it should have on a spring morning in Columbus, Ohio. Fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. Papers shifted. Chairs creaked. Somewhere near the back row, someone cleared their throat before silence settled over the room again. Michael Carter sat alone at the defense table, his hands folded neatly in front of him. His navy suit was slightly worn at the cuffs, the kind of wear that came from years of use rather than neglect. He stared straight ahead, not at the judge, not at the attorneys, not at the woman speaking against him. Jessica Carter stood a few feet away. Her voice trembled at just the right moments. Her eyes glistened beneath the courtroom lights. To anyone watching, she looked like a mother carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. "I've done everything I can for our daughter," she said quietly. "But Michael hasn't provided enough support. I shouldn't have to fight this hard just to take care of Emma." A murmur passed through the gallery. The judge remained expressionless, but several people exchanged knowing looks. The story was familiar. Divorced father, financial dispute, child support hearing. Most minds had already reached a conclusion. Michael heard every word. He heard the sadness in Jessica's voice. He heard the sympathy it created. He heard the silence that followed. What he didn't do was interrupt. Not once. Not when Jessica described unpaid expenses. Not when she suggested he cared more about work than family. Not when she painted a picture of a father who appeared only when it was convenient. He simply sat there, calm, still, the way a man sits when he has spent too many nights arguing with reality and finally grown tired of defending himself. Across the room, attorney Rachel Bennett watched carefully. Unlike everyone else, she wasn't looking at Jessica. She was watching reactions. The judge, the court clerk, the gallery, and occasionally Michael. There was no panic in his eyes. No anger. No desperation. Just exhaustion. The kind that comes from carrying something heavy for a very long time. Jessica continued. "Emma deserves stability," she said. "She deserves a parent who puts her first." This time Michael blinked slowly. That was all. No visible response. Yet the words landed harder than any accusation before them. Because Emma was the reason he had spent the last 2 years saying less and doing more. The reason he worked weekends. The reason he skipped vacations. The reason his own apartment still had mismatched furniture while every school fee arrived on time. But none of that was being discussed today. Not yet. Rachel lowered her eyes briefly toward the leather folder resting beside her chair. Hidden inside was a small silver USB drive. It looked ordinary, forgettable, easy to overlook. Yet Rachel knew something no one else in the courtroom knew. Before this case was over, that tiny piece of metal would change everything. For now, however, the room belonged to Jessica. The sympathy, the attention, the narrative, the truth would have to wait a little longer. By the time the hearing paused for a short recess, Jessica Carter had already won something more valuable than sympathy. She had won belief. Outside the courtroom, people spoke in lowered voices near the vending machines and coffee station. Most had never met her. Most had never met Michael. Yet they spoke as though they knew the entire story. That was the strange thing about appearances. A story repeated often enough could begin to feel like a memory, even to people who had never witnessed it. Jessica stood near a courthouse window overlooking a busy downtown street. Sunlight reflected from passing cars below. She accepted a few comforting words from a friend and offered a grateful smile. From a distance, she looked exactly like the woman everyone expected her to be. Brave, exhausted, sacrificed, the perfect victim. Meanwhile, Michael remained inside the nearly empty courtroom. He sat alone at the defense table while a clerk organized paperwork near the bench. The room felt larger without the crowd. Quieter, too. He loosened his tie slightly and stared at the polished wood surface in front of him. For a moment, his thoughts drifted somewhere far away from legal filings and court schedules. They drifted to a small elementary school gymnasium 6 months earlier. Emma had been standing on a stage wearing a paper crown during a school performance. She had searched the audience nervously until she found him. The second she did, her shoulders relaxed. Michael remembered that smile. He remembered it more clearly than anything Jessica had said that morning. A notification vibrated on his phone. A new post had appeared online. Another photo. Another carefully written caption. Jessica had become very good at them. Pictures of school pickups. Pictures of grocery carts. Pictures of late nights helping with homework. Each image carried the same unspoken message. Look how hard she works. Look how alone she is. Thousands of people saw those moments. None saw the transfer confirmations. None saw the tuition payments. None saw the weekends Michael spent repairing Emma's bicycle or helping her study for math tests. Quiet acts rarely made good social media content. Across town, Jessica's version of events had spread far beyond family court. Parents at Emma's school repeated it. Neighbors repeated it. Even some of Michael's co-workers had started treating him differently. Not openly, never directly, but he noticed the pauses when conversations stopped as he entered a room. He noticed invitations arriving less often. He noticed people choosing assumptions over questions. The hardest part was Emma. Children absorbed tension the way windows collected rain. They did not always understand what they saw, but they felt it. Lately, she had become quieter, more careful with her words. Sometimes she looked at Michael as though trying to solve a puzzle nobody had explained to her. That hurt more than any accusation ever could. Back at the courthouse, Rachel Bennett reviewed documents at a small table in a private conference room. She read every page twice. Then a third time. Numbers rarely lied. People did. One expense report caught her attention again. Then another. A pattern emerged. Small at first, almost invisible. Rachel leaned back slowly and folded her arms. Something about Jessica's story did not fit. The details were polished. Too polished. Like pieces forced together to create a picture that looked convincing from a distance. Rachel glanced toward the leather folder resting beside her. Inside, the silver USB drive remained untouched. Waiting. Silent. Patient. Just like the truth. The story followed Michael long after people stopped pretending not to judge him. A week after the first hearing, he walked into a neighborhood grocery store on a rainy Thursday evening. The automatic doors slid open. Shopping carts rattled across the tile floor. Somewhere near the bakery section, fresh bread filled the air with a warm scent that reminded him of simpler years. He grabbed a basket and moved quietly through the aisles. Milk. Eggs. Emma's favorite cereal. The list never changed much. What had changed were the looks. A woman he recognized from Emma's school glanced at him and quickly looked away. Two fathers near the produce section lowered their voices the moment he approached. Nobody said anything directly. They did not have to. Assumptions rarely announced themselves out loud. They lived in pauses, in half-finished conversations, in smiles that disappeared a second too quickly. Michael paid for his groceries and left without reacting. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windshield as he loaded the bags into his truck. His phone lit up with another notification. Another post. Another carefully crafted story. Jessica had become remarkably consistent. The photographs always showed sacrifice. The captions always suggested struggle. The comments below were worse. Hundreds of strangers offering support. Hundreds more condemning a man they had never met. Michael locked the screen and placed the phone face down on the passenger seat. That night, Emma arrived for her scheduled visit carrying a purple backpack and a science project board nearly as tall as she was. Michael smiled immediately. Emma smiled back, but there was hesitation behind it. Small, almost invisible, yet impossible for a father to miss. During dinner, she pushed pieces of pasta around her plate while rain continued against the kitchen window. Finally, she asked a question that seemed far too heavy for a 10-year-old. "Dad, are you in trouble?" The fork paused halfway to Michael's mouth. Not because he was surprised, because he had been afraid this moment would come. He set the fork down carefully. "Why would you ask that?" Emma stared at her plate. Some kids at school were talking. Their parents were talking too. Michael felt something tighten in his chest. Not anger. Sadness. The kind that arrived when adult conflicts found their way into a child's world. He chose his next words carefully. Sometimes people hear part of a story and think they know the whole thing. Emma looked up. "So what is the whole thing?" Michael smiled gently. "The whole thing takes longer to explain." Emma studied him for a moment. Then she nodded slowly and returned to her dinner. The conversation ended, but the question remained hanging quietly between them. Across town, Rachel Bennett sat alone in her office long after sunset. The city lights reflected across the glass wall behind her desk. Financial records covered nearly every available surface. Bank statements, expense reports, tuition invoices, medical receipts. She had spent hours comparing dates and numbers. The deeper she looked, the stranger everything became. According to Jessica's claims, Michael had failed repeatedly. According to the documents, he had not. Rachel picked up one report and compared it against another. The discrepancy was impossible to ignore now. She leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. For the first time, she was no longer wondering whether something was wrong with Jessica's story. She was beginning to wonder how much of it had ever been true at all. The following week moved with the slow, exhausting rhythm of a storm that refused to arrive, yet never truly passed. Michael woke before sunrise every morning. At 5:30, the coffee maker clicked on in his apartment kitchen. By 6, he was reviewing construction plans at the small dining table that doubled as his home office. The apartment was modest. A 2-bedroom unit on the edge of the city. Clean, quiet, practical. The refrigerator door was covered with Emma's drawings, school photos, and honor roll certificates. There were no expensive decorations, no luxury purchases, just evidence of where his priorities had always been. On Wednesday evening, he stopped by a pharmacy after work. The cashier handed him a small paper bag containing Emma's asthma medication. Michael glanced at the total and paid without hesitation. The receipt joined dozens of others already folded neatly inside a file cabinet drawer at home. Over the years, he had developed a habit of saving everything. School expenses, medical costs, activity fees, emergency purchases. Not because he expected a legal battle one day, because being organized made life easier. At least that was what he had always believed. Across town, Jessica continued building the version of reality everyone seemed eager to accept. New posts appeared online, new stories, new comments filled with encouragement and outrage. The narrative grew larger with each passing day. Yet Michael never responded. He never posted screenshots, never wrote angry messages, never attempted to defend himself in public. Some of his co-workers thought he was making a mistake. One even approached him during lunch. They sat in the break room while a microwave hummed in the corner. "You should say something," the man suggested. "People are talking." Michael stirred his coffee quietly. People always talk, but they think those things are true. Michael looked out the window for a moment. Cars moved through the parking lot below. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. "The people who matter already know who I am," he said. The answer sounded confident. It was not entirely true, because lately he was no longer sure Emma knew. That realization followed him home that evening. Emma was spending the night at his apartment. After dinner, she sat at the kitchen table working on a science assignment while Michael reviewed project estimates nearby. The room was peaceful, the kind of peace parents learn to appreciate. Then Emma asked another question. "Dad, why do adults always argue about money?" Michael looked up slowly. "Not all adults do. Mom says money shows what people care about." The pencil stopped moving in Emma's hand. "Is that true?" Michael considered the question carefully. "Sometimes. But time matters too. Effort matters. Showing up matters." Emma nodded as though trying to store the answer somewhere safe. A few minutes later, she returned to her homework. Michael returned to his paperwork. Yet neither noticed the small smile that had appeared on the other's face. At the same moment, several miles away, Rachel Bennett sat beneath the soft glow of a desk lamp. The courthouse hearing was approaching quickly. Stacks of financial records surrounded her. She had spent nearly 3 nights tracing transactions and comparing timelines. Now the picture was becoming impossible to ignore. Payment after payment led back to Michael. Tuition, prescriptions, school supplies, insurance premiums, summer programs. The pattern was consistent, precise, documented. Rachel reached for a yellow legal pad and wrote a single sentence across the top of the page. Then she underlined it twice. If these records are authentic, the entire case changes. Her eyes drifted toward the leather folder resting beside her desk. The silver USB drive remained inside, waiting quietly, like a final piece of a puzzle that was beginning to reveal a very different picture. 3 days before the next hearing, Rachel Bennett arrived at her office before sunrise. The city outside was still wrapped in pale blue morning light. Traffic had not yet filled the streets. Most of the building remained dark except for the glow beneath her office door. A cardboard tray holding 2 untouched coffees sat on the corner of her desk beside stacks of financial records. One cup had already gone cold. Rachel barely noticed. Her attention was fixed on the laptop screen in front of her. For nearly a week, she had been following numbers. Payments, transfers, school invoices, medical expenses. Each document told a small part of a larger story. Individually, they meant little. Together, they painted something impossible to ignore. Michael Carter had paid far more toward Emma's life than anyone in the courtroom had been led to believe. Rachel opened another folder and compared dates. The pattern remained consistent. Tuition payments arrived before deadlines. Insurance premiums were current. Medical costs were documented. Even extracurricular activities showed a trail of payments linked directly to Michael's accounts. The facts refused to match the public narrative. Her phone buzzed softly against the desk. An unknown number. Rachel almost ignored it. Instead, she answered. Silence greeted her at first. Then a voice. Distorted. Careful. You are representing Michael Carter? Rachel sat upright. Who is this? The caller ignored the question. Check your email. The line disconnected. Rachel stared at the phone for several seconds before opening her inbox. A new message had arrived less than 30 seconds earlier. No name. No explanation. No subject line. Only a single attachment. Her pulse quickened slightly. She downloaded the file. It was an audio recording. 32 minutes long. Rachel hesitated before pressing play. At first, she heard background noise. Music. Glasses clinking. The sound of people talking somewhere nearby. A restaurant, perhaps. Then a familiar voice entered the recording. Jessica. Rachel immediately recognized it from court. She leaned closer to the speaker. The conversation continued casually. Jessica sounded relaxed. Comfortable. Nothing like the exhausted image she presented publicly. Rachel listened carefully. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Suddenly a sentence made her freeze. Jessica laughed softly. People believe what they expect to believe. Another voice asked a question Rachel could not fully hear. Jessica answered without hesitation. I just needed everyone looking at him instead of looking at the facts. Rachel's hand slowly tightened around her pen. The room felt quieter now. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed distant. She replayed the section twice. Then a third time. The words never changed. Neither did the meaning. By mid-afternoon, Michael arrived at her office. Rain tapped gently against the windows while dark clouds gathered above the city skyline. Rachel handed him a copy of several financial summaries. Michael reviewed them quietly. These help, he said. More than help. Rachel closed the folder. They prove a pattern. Michael nodded. Then he noticed something different in her expression. What is it? Rachel glanced toward the laptop sitting on her desk. For the first time since taking the case, she allowed herself a small smile. I think someone just handed us the missing piece. Michael looked confused. Rachel did not explain immediately. Instead, she turned the laptop toward him and pressed play. The recording began. Outside, rain continued falling against the glass. Inside, the truth had finally started speaking for itself. Michael listened to the recording twice that evening. The first time, he focused on the words. The second time, he focused on the spaces between them. Rachel sat across from him in her office while the city lights shimmered beyond the rain-covered windows. Neither spoke for several seconds after the audio ended. The silence felt different now. Not hopeless. Not uncertain. Focused. Purposeful. Michael leaned back slowly. Do we know who recorded it? Rachel shook her head. Not yet. Do we know who sent it? No. She closed the laptop carefully. What we do know is that the timing matches several inconsistencies in her statements. Michael lowered his eyes toward the conference table. For months, he had become accustomed to defending himself against assumptions. Suddenly, he was sitting in front of something far more powerful than an argument. Evidence. Real evidence. Yet he felt no satisfaction. Only a strange sense of relief. As if a weight he had carried alone was finally being shared by someone else. The following morning, Rachel began reconstructing the timeline surrounding the recording. She requested additional financial disclosures. Cross-referenced dates. Compared transactions against public posts. The deeper she looked, the more the pieces aligned. One social media post describing financial hardship appeared less than 24 hours after a substantial deposit entered Jessica's account. Another post about unpaid school expenses appeared during the same week Michael had directly paid those exact costs. By noon, Rachel's desk was covered with highlighted documents and handwritten notes. Every page seemed to point in the same direction. Meanwhile, Jessica remained confident. She spent the afternoon at a coffee shop near downtown, meeting a close friend. Sunlight streamed through the windows while customers typed on laptops and waited for drinks. Jessica smiled as she described the upcoming hearing. It should be straightforward, she said. Everything is already leaning my way. Her friend nodded. People definitely support you. Jessica stirred her coffee slowly. That helps. What she did not know was that several miles away, the foundation beneath her story was beginning to crack. That evening, Emma attended a school open house. Parents moved through crowded hallways lined with student artwork and science projects. Michael arrived directly from work wearing a button-down shirt with rolled sleeves and carrying a folder filled with construction plans he had not yet finished reviewing. Emma spotted him immediately and waved. Her smile came faster this time, more naturally. For nearly an hour they walked through classrooms together. Emma proudly explained assignments. Michael listened carefully to every detail. At one point her teacher approached and thanked him for helping with a recent project. The comment lasted only a few seconds. Yet Emma noticed something. Her teacher spoke to Michael the way people spoke to dependable parents. Not absent ones. Not irresponsible ones. Dependable ones. Later, while driving home beneath a sky glowing orange from the setting sun, Emma looked out the passenger window and asked quietly, "Dad, do you ever get tired of people being wrong about you?" Michael smiled faintly. Traffic lights reflected across the windshield. "Sometimes." Emma waited. "Then what do you do?" Michael thought for a moment. "I keep being who I am until the truth catches up." Emma nodded slowly and turned back toward the window. Behind them, the city continued moving through another ordinary evening. Ahead of them, the next hearing was only days away. And for the first time since the case began, the truth was no longer trying to catch up. It was getting ready to arrive. The morning of the hearing arrived beneath a gray Ohio sky. Low clouds drifted above the courthouse while a cold breeze pushed fallen leaves across the sidewalk. By 8:30, the building had already begun to fill. Attorneys moved through security carrying briefcases and legal folders. Families waited quietly on wooden benches. The familiar rhythm of courthouse life continued as if nothing extraordinary were about to happen. Jessica Carter entered with the same confidence she had carried for weeks. Her appearance was polished. Her posture relaxed. Several people greeted her warmly as she crossed the hallway. She smiled and thanked them. Everything seemed to confirm what she already believed. The public was on her side. The narrative was on her side. The case was on her side. A few minutes later, Michael arrived through a different entrance. He carried a single folder beneath one arm and a cup of black coffee in the other hand. No entourage. No supporters. No dramatic display. He nodded politely to a courthouse employee who held the door open and continued toward the courtroom. Inside, Rachel Bennett was already preparing documents at counsel table. Neatly organized binders sat beside her laptop. Financial records, payment histories, school invoices, medical expenses, months of facts compressed into carefully labeled sections. Beneath those files rested something far smaller. A silver USB drive. Easy to overlook. Impossible to replace. Rachel glanced toward the gallery as spectators gradually filled empty seats. Some were curious observers. Others were connected to the families involved. Several recognized Jessica from social media. Their quiet conversations carried assumptions that had become familiar by now. The judge entered shortly after 9. Everyone rose. Chairs shifted against the floor. Papers rustled. Then the room settled into silence. Proceedings began. Jessica's attorney spoke first. The presentation followed the same familiar pattern. References to financial hardship. References to parental responsibility. References designed to reinforce a story the courtroom had already heard before. Jessica sat calmly beside her attorney, occasionally nodding as each point was made. From across the room, Michael remained still. He listened without interruption, without visible frustration, without reaction. Rachel occasionally glanced toward him. The same quiet composure remained. Yet she noticed something different today. He no longer looked exhausted. He looked ready. Nearly an hour passed before the judge turned toward Rachel. "Counselor Bennett, your response?" Rachel stood slowly. The movement itself seemed to change the atmosphere inside the room. She thanked the court and began reviewing financial evidence. Payment records appeared first. Dates, amounts, supporting documentation. One by one they entered the record. The judge studied each exhibit carefully. Jessica's confident expression began to fade slightly. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. Rachel continued. Tuition payments, insurance records, prescription expenses, direct transfers. Every document pointed in the same direction. Every document contradicted the image that had been presented publicly. A murmur spread through the gallery. Jessica shifted in her seat. Her attorney whispered something to her. Rachel allowed the silence to settle before returning to the podium. Then she placed one hand gently on the table beside her laptop. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "there is one additional piece of evidence the court should hear." For the first time all morning, Jessica looked uncertain. Not afraid. Not yet. But uncertain. Rachel reached for the silver USB drive. The same drive that had remained hidden while the truth slowly assembled itself piece by piece. Across the courtroom, Michael watched quietly. The moment he had waited months for had finally arrived. The courtroom felt unusually quiet as Rachel Bennett inserted the silver USB drive into her laptop. Even the small sounds seemed amplified. The soft tap of computer keys, the turning of a page, the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. Every eye in the room followed her movements. Jessica Carter sat upright beside her attorney, maintaining a composed expression. Yet the confidence she had carried into the courthouse that morning no longer looked effortless. It looked practiced. The judge adjusted his glasses and glanced toward Rachel. "Proceed." Rachel nodded. "Your Honor, this recording was provided anonymously and has been authenticated through additional supporting evidence obtained during discovery." She paused briefly. "The court may find its contents relevant." The laptop speakers came alive with background noise. Restaurant sounds. Conversations. Glasses touching. The ordinary atmosphere of an evening gathering. For several moments, nothing significant happened. A few people in the gallery exchanged confused looks. Then a familiar voice emerged. Jessica's voice. Clear. Unmistakable. Rachel did not look at the screen. She watched the room instead. She watched recognition spread from face to face. She watched the judge's expression sharpen. She watched Jessica's attorney slowly straighten in his chair. On the recording, Jessica sounded relaxed, comfortable, completely different from the emotional image presented throughout the hearings. The conversation continued. Casual comments. Laughter. Then came the sentence. The one Rachel had replayed dozens of times. People believe what they expect to believe. Silence filled the courtroom as the recording continued. Another voice asked a question that remained partially obscured by background noise. Then Jessica answered. "I just needed everyone looking at him instead of looking at the facts." No one moved. No one spoke. Even the spectators seemed frozen. The words hung in the air with a weight that no legal argument could match. Rachel let the recording continue for another minute before stopping it. The room remained silent. Jessica stared forward. Her face had lost color. Her attorney leaned toward her and whispered urgently. She barely seemed to hear him. Across the courtroom, Michael remained exactly as he had been all morning. Calm, quiet, motionless. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply sat there while the truth spoke louder than he ever had. The judge reviewed several documents placed before him. Rachel rose again and began connecting the recording to the financial evidence already entered into the record. Payment histories matched dates. Public claims contradicted documented expenses. Every new detail reinforced the same conclusion. Piece by piece, the story that had appeared so convincing from a distance began collapsing beneath its own inconsistencies. In the gallery, whispers spread despite repeated requests for silence. Some of the same people who had arrived believing they understood the case now avoided looking toward Michael entirely. Others stared at Jessica with expressions of disbelief. The shift was impossible to miss. Public opinion had not changed because someone argued harder. It had changed because facts finally occupied the space where assumptions had been living. The judge eventually raised one hand, and the room fell silent once more. His voice remained measured and professional, but his concern was obvious. Additional review would be required. Further examination of the evidence would follow. Yet everyone present understood something important had already happened. The question was no longer whether Michael had failed his daughter. The question had become how so many people had been convinced of something that the evidence no longer supported. As the hearing moved toward its conclusion, Jessica lowered her eyes toward the table in front of her. For the first time since this case began, she looked less like someone controlling a story and more like someone losing control of it. The final ruling did not arrive with dramatic speeches or raised voices. It arrived the way most important truths do. Quietly, deliberately. 1 week after the hearing, the courtroom filled once again beneath the same fluorescent lights that had witnessed months of accusations and assumptions. The atmosphere felt different now, lighter in some places, uncomfortable in others. The judge reviewed the findings carefully. Financial records had been verified. Payment histories had been confirmed. The audio evidence had been examined alongside supporting documentation. Piece by piece, the picture had become clear. When the decision was finally announced, there was no confusion left in the room. The claims that had defined the case could not be supported by the evidence. The documented record told a different story. A more complete story. A truer one. Michael listened without celebration. His expression barely changed. Across the aisle, Jessica remained silent. The confidence that once surrounded her had disappeared. Not because someone had defeated her in an argument. Because reality had finally caught up with a version of events that could not survive scrutiny. As people slowly filed out of the courtroom, conversations followed them into the hallway. Some avoided eye contact. Others offered brief nods toward Michael. A few even looked embarrassed. Public opinion had shifted again. But Michael no longer cared very much about that. There was only one opinion he had worried about from the beginning. Emma's. Outside the courthouse, late afternoon sunlight reflected off office windows across downtown Columbus. The air carried the first hints of summer. Michael stepped through the courthouse doors and paused on the stone steps. For the first time in months, he felt no urge to explain himself. No need to defend his character. No desire to correct strangers. The truth had done that work already. Then he heard a familiar voice. "Dad." He turned. Emma stood near the bottom of the steps beside Rachel Bennett. A light breeze moved strands of her hair across her face. She looked nervous for a moment. Then she crossed the distance between them. Michael barely had time to react before she wrapped her arms around him. He closed his eyes briefly and returned the hug. Around them, the city continued moving as if nothing remarkable had happened. Cars passed. Traffic lights changed. People hurried toward evening plans. Yet for Michael, everything important existed inside that single moment. Emma stepped back and looked up at him. "I am sorry," she said softly. Michael frowned. "For what?" She lowered her eyes. "For not always knowing what to believe." The words landed harder than anything spoken inside the courtroom. Michael smiled gently. "You do not have to apologize for being a kid." Emma smiled for the first time that day. A real smile. Not cautious. Not uncertain. Real. Rachel watched from a respectful distance before quietly excusing herself. The case was finished. Her work was done. Father and daughter began walking toward the parking garage together. Neither seemed in a hurry. Emma talked about summer plans. About school. About a science project she wanted to improve next year. Michael listened to every word. Above them, the evening sky stretched across the city in shades of gold and blue. He had not won because a court ruled in his favor. He had not won because public opinion changed. He had won because the person who mattered most could finally see him clearly again. And as they disappeared into the crowd, the lesson left behind was simple. The truth did not need revenge. It only needed time.